as well as face-to-face interaction through workshops.
Ghana's District Assembly Elections Act of 1994 stipulates that district assembly elections must be held every 4 years and at least 6 months apart from parliamentary elections.
Still on elections, the issue of making district-level election partisan has popped up again. As expected, there are mixed views on whether it should be held along partisan lines or not. Incidentally, political think tanks and analysts are also divided on the issue. However, Article 55, Clause 3 of the 1992 Constitution of Ghana, which is an entrenched clause, prohibits the district-level elections to be organized by the Electoral Commission on partisan basis.
We should leave the local government elections the way it is in its non-partisan state. It is simply because a critical aspect of the local level election is not being well attended to, and that is the issue of financing. We must know that, when it comes to elections at the local level, candidates have to campaign, and campaigning demands a lot of resources. Now, if you don't have it and a political party approaches you to give you the resources, people are likely to take it, and that is what is the reason why the political parties have hijacked the local government election.
But if we think that it should still be non-partisan, but the actors are politically active, partisan active, then we are not being sincere with ourselves. So I think that it's time for us to be sincere as a nation and say that our actors are partisan actors, and therefore we should change the law.
Already it is highly politicized, even though it's done in a very clandestine manner. People don't, if you check a lot of the assembly posters, you can identify where each candidate belongs to. But I think that if we make it partisan, then we can make laws to, guide it.
Now, canoe and inshore fleets operating in the country's waters are to observe the 2023 closed fishing season from July 1, 2023 to July 31st, 2023. For industrial trawlers, that will also come into effect from July 1, 2023 to 31st August 2023. Announcing the dates for this year's closed fishing season in Accra, the Minister for Fisheries and Aquaculture Development, Mrs. Mavis Hawa-Kumsin, appealed to fishers to comply with the directive, which is primarily to rebuild the depleted fish stock in our waters.
The ministry will therefore continue to empower the Fisheries Enforcement Unit to curb any illegal activities. Some of the new measures that the ministry has put in place to combat illegal fishing are as follows. Deployment of electronic monitoring system on 3 trawl vessels this year for the pilot phase, and it will be extended to cover all trawlers and tuna vessels by 2025. The EMS has a video recorder, a camera, and a global positioning system to recording fishing activities at sea 24/7. Implementation of ministerial directive on specification on trawl gear to reduce catch of juvenile fishes and bycatches. Directives on that trawl vessels can be at sea for not more than 30 days for any fishing expedition. I am also happy to inform you that following consultations, Côte d'Ivoire will implement their 2023 close season within the same period as Ghana. This will reduce the likelihood of fishers from Ghana migrating to fish in a neighboring country. Next year, we expect Togo, Benin, and Liberia to join.
Still on fishing and aquaculture, 550 fishers selected from communities along the coast are in training in masonry, carpentry, dressmaking, hairdressing, electronics and auto engineering. The skills training, which falls under the Alternative Livelihoods Training Support for Fishers program, is to equip fisherfolk with additional livelihood avenues which they can fall on when their fishing business gets a bit slow. Fisheries and Aquaculture Development Minister Mrs. Mavis Hawa-Kumsin said the training will be expanded to cover 8,000 fishers across the country.
Way of reducing pressure on the fisheries resources, the ministry and its partners including the Ghana Fisheries Recovery Activity, has launched the Alternative Livelihood Training Support for Fishers, starting with 550 fishers in masonry, carpentry, dressmaking, hairdressing, electronics, and auto engineering in selected communities along the coast. This training will be scaled up to over 8,000 fishers, and after the training, trainers will be supported to set up to ensure that they can earn incomes from their trade.
Away from fisheries, on 20th June, the President will join other African and European leaders for a special meeting in Aqaba, Spain, at the Cordoba meeting. Terrorism and jihadist activities in West Africa and the Gulf of Guinea will be the focal point. The meeting, at the behest of the King of Spain, Felipe VI, seeks to tackle jihadist movements, bolster security and military cooperation in the fight against terrorism from the Sahel region. President Akufo-Addo, in discussion with Spain's ambassador to Ghana, Javier Gutierrez, said the agenda is very critical to West African security and pledged to work with the meeting to deal with the growing security threats in West Africa.
The visit of Spain's ambassador to Ghana, Javier Gutierrez, to the Jubilee House was to meet President Akufo-Addo to discuss two main issues. First is to present an official invitation from the King of Spain, King Abdullah, to attend the Aqaba meeting on June 20th, 2023. The 2023 meeting is focusing on how to tackle the growing security threat from jihadist insurgents in West Africa, which is the spillover from the Sahel region. The Aqaba meeting will also look at how participating countries work with the authorities in West Africa to support the Accra Initiative, a regional initiative to fight terrorism in West Africa.
This meeting is focusing on West Africa and the Sahel, particularly on the threat of a spillover from Sahel into the coastal states of West Africa. Given the relevance of Ghana and the leadership, I should say, in these efforts, there was a particular interest in your participation there. Also, Ghana is leading the Accra initiative, and this can be a good opportunity to discuss cooperation with relevant partners to face on how to address terrorism and the threats in the region.
President Akufo-Addo said government's efforts to deal with terrorism in the region will receive Ghana's full support.
This is an area where we need to have that discussion. The terrorist outrages that are taking place in the Sahel, we are directly affected. Things that happen in Burkina Faso. In Burkina Faso for a long time is known as Northern Ghana. So it has a direct impact on us. So we have a stake, a very important stake in the stability of that country. And most importantly, at this time, is seeing that country free from terrorist activities. So a meeting like this, which would enable important figures to brainstorm and find solutions, how to go forward, I think is something that necessarily Ghana will have to be part of.
Mr. Gutierrez said Spain's new law for sustainable development cooperation is a move by the Spanish government to strengthen cooperation with other African countries and encourage Ghana to take advantage of it to support her development.
The program has a financial envelope of 200 million euro for a period of 7 years, between 2021 and 2027. At the embassy, we've been reaching out to the relevant ministries, the ministries of land resources, health, several of them, tourism, environment, agriculture, because we see that there are very good opportunities to push forward joint programs, and I hope in September there will be several proposals presented to the committee in Brussels, and hopefully several projects will be implemented in Ghana.
President Akufo-Addo said Ghana will explore all the needed avenues to improve relations between Accra and Madrid. Mr. Guterres called for Ghana's support for Spain's bid to host the 2027 Specialized International Exhibition with special focus on sustainable cities.
Let's take you to the north now. As part of activities to celebrate 30 years of parliamentary democracy in Ghana, the Speaker of Parliament, Mr. Alban Sumana Bagbin, has paid a courtesy call on the overlord of Dagbon, Yana Abukari II, at his palace in Yendi in the northern region. Mr. Bagbin called for a unifying force of the people to ensure the long-awaited development of the region. He encouraged the people to embrace peace and unity for development to thrive.
The Speaker was accompanied by his pals, MPs from the northern region led by MP for Tamale South, Mr. Haruna Idrisu, and some party executives. The overlord of Dagbon, Yana Abukari, commended the Speaker of Parliament for his elevation to the highest office in Parliament. He said his election as the Speaker was purely based on merit and not politics, and further praised him for his neutrality and fairness on the floor of the House. The Yana believes the visit to his palace shows the Speaker's readiness to collaborate with traditional authorities as major stakeholders in the governance process. He said the northern region lags behind in terms of development and urged the Speaker to ensure that all bills on poverty alleviation are passed to create opportunities for the teeming youth. He asked for assistance in the construction of the new Bewa Palace and facilitated the passage of the 1930 revised Dagbon Constitution, which is currently before the National House of Chiefs.
It is refreshing to note that the Dagbon Kingdom, in its efforts towards tackling our development challenges as well as attracting development partners, has put together some strategies aimed at facilitating issues regarding development of the area. I am glad to inform you that the all-inclusive constitution review processes are completed and approved by the Dagbon Traditional Council and the Northern Region House of Chiefs.
The Speaker of Parliament, Mr. Alban Bagbin, thanked Yana for unifying the people of the North for development. He acknowledged the importance of traditional authorities in the gains made so far in the democratic governance of the country and promised to work closely with them.
And so I want us to look at the possibility of creating space for our chiefs, for our religious leaders, and for our civil society leaders to play active politics in the governance of this country. They can do it without being partisanship. And in any case, partisanship is not bad. That's why we accepted to do partisan politics.
The Speaker of Parliament and his entourage are expected to call on the Yagbon Wura at his palace.
From the north, let's take you to the court. The Accra High Court has set aside a conviction and a contempt case in which the Minister for Defence, Dominic Nitiwo, and the Chief of Defence Staff, Vice Admiral Seth Amwama of the Ghana Armed Forces were found guilty of contempt over the violation of a 2018 land dispute judgment. The court's decision followed arguments raised by the Attorney General, Mr. Godfred Yeboah-Dame, over the extent of the power of the court to determine the matter, and also for the fact that the actual persons who allegedly committed the act of contempt were not cited in the case, which is contrary to the requirements of law.
An Obodai Sai, an estate developer, filed a contempt application against the Minister for Defence, Mr. Dominic Nitiwo, and the Chief of Defence Staff, Vice Admiral Seth Amwama of the Ghana Armed Forces, where he argued military personnel denied him entry to repossess his land after a court's judgment was entered in his favour in an action against the Attorney General, the Minister, and the CDS on November 1, 2018. He said the military continued to interfere with his property. Based on his argument, the court found the Minister for Defence, Mr. Dominic Nitiwo, and the Chief of Defence Staff, Vice Admiral Seth Amwama, guilty. The Attorney General, Mr. Godfred Yeboah-Dame, whose attention was drawn to the matter, filed an application to have the conviction and the entire contempt proceedings set aside. Prior to Mr. Yeboahdame's argument, Mr. Charles Amonkote, a lawyer for the applicant, informed the court that his client wanted to discontinue the case because the Attorney General had assured him that compensation will be paid to him in respect of the said land. However, the court, presided over by Justice Nabila Naima Wahab, ruled that the application had already been heard and concluded. The Attorney General, Mr. Godfred Yeboahdame, said a cursory observation of the commotion for committal for contempt showed that there were no proper respondents named in the application. He argued that the application was titled "The Minister for Defence and Chief of Defence Staff," and the application was brought in the official capacity of the respondents. Mr. Yeboahdame further argued that at the time the alleged contempt of court was committed, the Chief of Defence Staff was not in office. The Attorney General again contended that a contempt application is such that it is issued against the specific person to which the allegation is being held and not a corporate entity. Mr. Charles Amonkote, lawyer for the applicant respondent, opposed to the application for the court to set aside the contempt conviction and the entire proceedings. He told the court that all offices are occupied by personalities for a period of time. Justice Nabila Naima Wahab, after listening to the parties, set aside the earlier conviction and the entire contempt proceedings. She held that although the contempt proceedings have already been heard and a ruling delivered, the proceedings against the parties not personally named deprive the court of the jurisdiction to consider the sentence. The court concluded that a judgment or an order given without jurisdiction is void, and the court is under a legal obligation to set same aside.
Let's do politics now. Presidential hopeful of the New Patriotic Party, NPP, Mr. Alan Kyerematen, has outlined what he terms the Great Transformation Plan, GTP. Speaking at a private sector engagement in Accra, Mr. Kyerematen said if elected flag bearer of the NPP and subsequently a president in the 2024 elections, his private sector-centered initiatives would help win Ghana off the chronic IMF dependency. The Great Transformation Plan is an industrialization agenda to propel Ghana into economic freedom.
We have had to go back to the IMF for the 17th time, although we have promised never to go back. As part of the industrial transformation agenda, there are 10 new sectors that we are going to promote. Vehicle assembly, and second, garments and textiles, industrial chemicals. We have 3 million tons of industrial salt we can mine every year. Then bauxite and aluminium. I don't need to preach to you about that. Iron and steel. I don't need to preach to you about that. But if we have steel, we have iron, and we have plastics, that is the basis for the component industry, for the automobile industry, and for construction, and for literally everything. So you need this kind of integrated planning tool. And last but not the least, you cannot industrialize by importing every piece of machinery. So we have to be able to produce some of our machinery here.
If I want to talk from the businessman's perspective, yeah, there are some great ideas that he shared, which has to do with, number one, the fixing of the exchange rate at the ports for purposes of duty. This is something that Guta has been, calling for over the years, and we think when that thing is implemented, it will go a long way to help the business community, and for that matter, the importers to plan and also make projections, and also It will also go a long way, to let prices be stable.
And to the international front, where the United Nations Human Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, wants a concerted action towards saving souls displaced as a result of human rights abuse, war, persecution and violence across the world. The UN agency's Global Trend in Forced Displacement 2022 report reveals that 110 million people are